Welcome to another episode of Dirty Habits. It's Brother Chris and Brother Justin, and we're coming to you again. We're continuing our discussion of the paranormal and the Christian response. And in fact, today that's what we're going to be talking about is kind of the Christian response to the paranormal. In one sense, the church and before the church, Israel, already had a response. The paranormal is anything but new. In fact, in some form, it's been around for as long as, humanity almost. But we see already in the Torah, the central focus of the Old Testament, that there are multiple condemnations and denunciations of any of these practices. Do not recite charms, do not practice soothsaying, don't lacerate your bodies, do not turn to ghosts, don't consult spirits by which you will be defiled. You shall not learn to imitate the abominations of the nations. You will not practice divination. No one shall be a soothsayer, an augur, a sorcerer, one who casts spells, consults ghosts and spirits, or seeks oracles
What's
from
an
the
augur?
dead.
Aside from I have an auger tool.
Yeah,
I used to dig
augury I
posts
think is
for.
kind of a foretelling of the future, maybe omens and things.
Oh, okay.
But that brings up something interesting. There's so many clearly the ancient world understood the paranormal because they have individual names for all these different types of, practitioners, whether they're diviners, soothsayers, augurs, sorcerers, spellcasters, necromancers, and what's interesting is the penalty for it is always death. For witchcraft, for practicing these things, I will cut you off from among the people. Anyone who serves as a medium shall be put to death. And one of the things that our Jewish brothers and sisters drew a connection between was there was a connection between pagan worship, occult practice, and what we could only call like deviant sexuality. I mean, whether it's the murdering of children, the fruit of sexuality, or whether it's the temple prostitutes or these things, you have these three things that kind of always go together. And the one thing that's interesting is this condemnation continues unabated throughout the whole New Testament and the apostles and such. We're told by Paul, or in the book of Acts, that after Paul's preaching, I think it was Ephesus, but don't quote me on that, but those who had become believers came forward and openly acknowledged their former practices. A large number of them had practiced magic, collected their books, and burned them in public. When he speaks about the evils that prohibit one from entering the kingdom of God, so eternal death, it's idolatry, sorcery, over and over again. And one of the things that he tells St. Timothy, St. Paul, is he says, in the last times there will be some who turn away from the faith by paying attention to deceitful spirits and demonic instructions. And just what is that, right? What are we to make of something like that in the 20th century, in our day and age?
What is demonic instruction?
Yeah, and deceitful spirits.
Yeah. Well, and just to be clear, the Israelites and in the early church, throughout all of Scripture, the warning wasn't to not do these things because it's frivolous and false, and it's just a bad thing to do, but it's not something that's real.
Right.
It's that this is really bad. There's the defilement is real, the spirits are real, and so you shouldn't be tangling up with them.
Yeah, I think because of we mentioned this in one of our earlier talks on this, but I think you've brought up the idea that the paranormal really is addressing an issue for people whose faith is either lacking something or don't have faith at all, and I think that's an important part to kind of focus on, because a lot of these lies, these myths come forward, and I think there's a lot of naivety in the modern times, that despite all of our education, our technology, when it comes to spiritual matters, because the church doesn't hold the place in the hearts of as people the way it used to, there's a widespread kind of ignorance, if not outright falsehood about religious matters. Even something as simple as spiritual and sacred are not synonymous terms.
Yeah.
Right? Simply because something is spiritual does not in any way, shape, or form mean that it's sacred. You have spiritual things, entities, experiences out there that are anything but. And
well,
then,
and you know what too? I think in the modern era, there's so much emphasis placed on knowing as much as you can and experiencing as much as you can in order to form opinions on your own about things. That's why you get people like a Joe Rogan or something like saying you should do DMT and just see the weird spirits and stuff, and like you got to experience it so that you know. And I think that's a lot of the reason why people get into this stuff too, is because they're curious,
right?
And they figure, what bad could it really do? I get this experience, I get this knowledge. It's not really going to bind anything bad to me. Anything negative, truly, because all knowledge is power. Why not get as much of it as I can?
Right. And that whole idea of curiosity, even in my own background is, entirely is in my Christian life. But I remember as like a 12-year-old, 11-year-old flipping through the book of Revelation for the first time, and there's like 7-headed dragons and crazy stuff. Yeah. And I just remember thinking, this is crazy. I want to read this. I had no idea what any of it meant. I didn't have any idea of symbolism. I didn't have any, but it's like so, drawing to you with the symbols and the kind of images it brings forth. But we shouldn't really be surprised about this idea of demonic instruction, deceit. The Lord himself, Jesus himself, warns us about it. He says, the devil doesn't stand in truth. There's no truth in him. And he constantly throughout the Bible, he's in the New Testament, we're told about the deceptiveness of these spirits. And I really want to look at, some of the issues with the occult on a practical level. Any Catholic exorcist, and we live in a time period where actually there's a lot of good ones who are willing to actually talk about their discussions, right? Father Chad Ripperger. There's
he's one of the most awesome.
Although passed away now, Father Amorth, Gabriel Amorth. Mm-hmm. There's, what's his name? He's really out on a lot of them. Lampert.
Oh, the guy from up north? In California? Lampert. I forget his name, but the Rite was based off of him.
Yeah. Right? But there's if you go to the YouTube and you put in Catholic exorcist, you'll get like 200 videos, and most of these you'll see a lot of the same faces repeat themselves, and to be honest, a lot of the stories repeat themselves. But here you have people with really 4,000 years plus of tradition, Judeo-Christian tradition behind them, and understanding and spiritual life and mysticism, and these are people who deal with this day in and day out. And I think, if you really want to know about these entities, these practices, they're the people to look at. And the one thing that they all comes clear with all of them is any kind of involvement with the occult is a direct means for demonic involvement in that person's life. It may start as something totally silly or as a joke. It might start as a whim. But as someone it's almost like drugs in the sense that usually it takes you a while to get hooked, but someone could go on a bad trip the very first time they have it. And it's the same way, is you just never know how or why or what these things will interact with people. And that's why discernment is so important. But discernment really requires that we do know the truth, the spiritual truth that's been revealed to us, and that we attempt to live by it and really look at things in light of the gospel and those teachings. But let me just give a list of 6 of the most common lies that we hear that are spread everywhere in the paranormal community, whether you're listening to blogs or reading blogs or listening to podcasts or whatever it is. And these are from the Catholic exorcists, and I think these start to address some of these issues. I know there will be a lot of people who maybe argue or things, but like I said, we really have a lot of background and experience on the side of what we're talking about. So what's the first one? The first lie, that there is such a thing as good or gray neutral magic, right? That's what you hear all the time. Well,
so white magic.
I'm a practitioner, but I'm really a white magic. I don't deal with evil spells, things, as if magic were just sort of some natural element that we could pull, and it's sort of dependent on the person using it rather than the thing itself. The Judeo-Christian tradition totally rejects that. All magic, no matter how much the person is a person of integrity, they think, no matter what their opinion of the practitioner, and no matter what it's being used for. In the Catechism, it points out the faith healers and such in a lot of indigenous cultures, and even that's dangerous because you might be using it ostensibly for a good reason, but you're dealing with issues that you have no idea what happens. And in fact, several of the exes talk about that they say, people have issues happen in their life or in their homes. They'll turn to these new age people who come in and, burn sage and do all these weird things. And it only makes it worse because there's no real power that these people have over it, although you hear all these multiple stories of it. But yeah, there's no such thing. Magic itself is inherently evil. It flows forth from these entities as a way to sort of bring people and manipulate them. Number two, and now this is a little bit, it's not as black and white as it sounds at first, because the church does understand that through supernatural means, people can develop good abilities that we would consider to be extraordinary, the charisms, the mystical gifts. But in terms of the idea that human beings by our own power can access these paranormal abilities.
So you like psychic stuff?
Right. Again,
yeah.
The exorcists are say definitely not. All such abilities are demonic manipulation. Therefore, anyone who tells you they have these kind of powers is either one, lying, knowing that their powers come from something else that they don't want to admit, or they're truly just as deceived as the people who believe in them. They really do think that this just came about through their own gift, their heritage, all these different ways that people understand that.
So define psychic powers there.
Well, yeah, psychic we can use in a lot of different ways, but
because some people do have
right.
God-given gifts,
right? And the church is even intelligent enough after 2,000 years of experience. Mm-hmm. Even the church will say there are probably natural human abilities that we have the potential to have that look extraordinary, but right now, for whatever reason, only certain people in a small group are able to sort of manifest them to some extent. So the church doesn't outright say anything that seems a little bit above the norm is automatically demonic. But this idea to, be able to consult the dead, to be connected to spirits, that kind of thing is what they're really, talking about. Similarly, specifically that spiritual beings can predict the future. A lot of times this is where it arises, right? It's the psychic drawing forth the spirit, it's the seance, it's the consulting of the dead, or trying to draw things through the Ouija board. And it's always like, tell me what's going to happen in the future, tell me what's going to happen.
Yeah. Magic 8 Ball.
Right, yeah.
That kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
But the reality is these entities, despite what they say, have no power whatsoever to determine or know what the future is. They can, in our Judeo-Christian point of view, because they are not bound by our experience of time and space, and because they are, at least as we describe these fallen angels, are beings of incredible intellect naturally for themselves, certainly they can make really good educated guesses about things. And if they've been watching you your entire life, they can probably give you stuff that you want to hear or know, or things that will appear to be like they foretold the future. But really it's educated guesses, and that means they might get things right, but they do not actually know the future. Only God can determine and knows the future.
Well, see, there's an irony there, is that you having a very close relationship with God, right? He can give you personal revelation that, isn't going to be a lie, and so trying to sidestep that avenue with some sort of self-mastery or something over some sort of psychic ability or something.
I heard a priest put it this way once, which I thought was interesting. He said, imagine like if even in this world, not let alone the spiritual world, now this shows how old I am because his example used the World Trade Center. He goes, but imagine you're standing on the top of the World Trade Center, and if you're looking down, you can see an accident about to happen before the people themselves probably even see it. It's not that you have some great intelligence, it's you have a higher vantage point to view things. Now take that to the higher level of now you're above the world, so to speak, and looking down. So yeah, you can manipulate things in order to appear that you know these things, but really you're just seeing it a split second before sort of natural means can come up with these ideas. The fourth one, and these two are big ones for today, I think, a lot because of all these ghost hunting stories and all this stuff. Number 4, human beings do not have any ability, none, to manipulate and command spiritual beings by themselves. The reality is no one can use the devil or the demons for their own end. In fact, it's he who's using them, although they may be completely ignorant of that. No human being by their own power can bind, command, control a demon. Only through the power of Christ, usually only given through the exorcist or in our normal, ordinary life to keep him at bay because of the way we live our spiritual life, you can, of course, keep him outside and control him in that sense. But the people who think that they control these spirits, that they're the ones who are calling them forth and deciding what they're going to talk about, sadly, they're really misguided, and they're being manipulated and led somewhere by these beings towards, bad things. And on this, I'll recommend a book which is not written by a Catholic, but it's a book called Hungry Ghosts. I cannot recall the author's name right now. There's a second one that also has the title Hungry Ghosts in it. He's a man who began his journey in this group trying to figure out that we're raising spirit guides. And he became very interested to the point where he wanted to check out the background that the spirit had told him. And he actually went across country to where the spirit was from, looked up nothing was true. And so he began to get disillusioned in this. Long story short, he ended up taking his own life after he wrote these books. Because he really points out the fact that this whole idea of ghost hunting and fun spirituality and nice spirits is not true at all. And he's not a believer. He didn't die as a Christian. He didn't live as a Christian. In fact, the term hungry ghost comes from Buddhism. It's one of the realms of the dead. And so it's a good book to read as sort of a warning about the people who naively think, spirits can be contacted. We have good spirits.
So the author wrote the book?
Who committed suicide later. Yeah.
And he wrote the book based off of him chasing after?
His own experience.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
So he thought he was communing with ghosts that were telling him...
Right, he joined a group, I think through a woman that he met, and at first he thought it was hokey, but then as they would become more specific and some of these spirits would attach to him, they'd tell him all these things about their previous life. And so he just thought it was interesting, so he actually went to check it out without telling the group one day, and actually flew across country and spent like 2 weeks and could find nothing. No grave. Is that the Hungry Ghost author? I think it's Fisher. Oh. Look up Fisher, Hungry Ghosts. I think it's Fischer, if I recall.
What were they leading him, or supposedly leading him to find out, or or what?
Yeah, it's a really interesting. Maybe we'll talk about that book a little more sometime to get some idea. Joe Fisher, and he eventually took his own life.
Wow.
Threw himself off a cliff.
Channeling the spirit, the siren call of hungry ghosts, a riveting investigation into channeling and spirit guides.
And he would kill himself a few years after writing it because he could never escape the kind of...
Was he oppressed?
Yeah.
Obviously.
So, and that one goes into number 5, which is another big one, especially for the ghost hunters. And I heard this from Father Lampert, which I thought was interesting, an exorcist. He said, spiritual entities by definition are not confined to any physical dimension. Therefore, the idea that something is trapped or confined to a haunted house is a lie. That being could move and live and go anywhere it wants at any time. It may be manipulating you for a reason to make you think it's there, but that's not the case.
It's like The Grudge.
Right,
just
exactly.
Follows
the
you
Grudge,
wherever you
just
go.
Terrifying. I'll tell you the Japanese movies that are remade even in American are terrifying. I just watched one called the Screaming Village. Terrifying.
Oh, really? Is it newer?
Yeah.
I love horror movies.
I just saw it like a month ago.
So this is the epitome of stupid, but I was watching Ghost Adventures with Aaron, guilty pleasure, when they went to, I might have mentioned this in a previous podcast, but they go to Alcatraz and
Al
he
Capone
goes to
or
Al
something.
Capone's cell and he
Yep.
starts yelling at Al Capone to show himself. Show yourself, Al Capone. Does it make you mad? I'm jumping on your bed, Al Capone. Like, whoa, you guys are dumb to think that. First of all, he didn't die in Alcatraz.
Right.
Okay. Second of all, that I'm sure tons of people use that cot, and that's probably not his exact cot.
Yeah.
But anyway, to your point, okay, maybe Al Capone could have haunted that area if his ghost was so inclined.
And I guess, those who have seen or if you haven't, go back and look at our first one we ever did, which was on ghosts. We have to be careful because the church is much more scientific, realistic, experienced about this than maybe people give them credit. And there are ghosts, and there is, which could presumably be kind of confined to an area because they're trying to achieve something. So but generally speaking, we have to realize that like these haunted houses, these things that the ghost hunters go looking for something, there's nothing trapped there. Things can follow you back wherever they want. They can chase you down. And the final one,
especially if you welcome him in, right?
yes, yeah.
Yeah, if you're
We'll
calling him out,
we'll actually have a thing about the 7 degrees of demonic activity that Father Gabriel Amorth did. We'll talk about that sometime.
Yeah.
The last one, though, and this went to Quinn's thing. I think, what did you mention, Quinn?
Auras.
You said auras. The idea that one can sense or read various energies to determine the spiritual character of a person, place, or thing. No. Now, it is true. All living things emit an energy, and that can have a color, but science hasn't determined that there's any differing colors between
So mood
living
rings
things, per se.
don't actually tell you what your mood is.
Yeah. But see, that goes into the whole idea. That's what I mean, is there's so much that's just unquestioned. And I would like to approach it, because I'd like to be a skeptical person who's at least open, because as a religious person, I'm open to that there's weird experiences.
Oh, yeah, totally.
But I would like to really have conversations, and maybe we'll have somebody sometime who can actually talk without getting like us getting heated about that. Like, well, really, how can a spirit box work if a being is transphysical? Like, what are you picking up? And why? How can
Spirit
it?
box?
How can it? The things where you're listening and it suddenly has a voice somewhere that
Whoa!
talks.
What? Really?
Yeah.
That's on ghosts?
Or like the detector.
That's called a spirit box.
How can you detect a ghost? Like, if a ghost is transphysical, how do you why would it emit any energy? I mean,
Right.
so I'm not saying it's
I don't-
absolutely can't, but I just want to see like
though, right?
right. That's what the thing is. I want to.
It should be backed.
And
by
it's always
science.
about energies, right? This vague idea of energy. This, like, well, I felt a negative energy. I felt this.
But
and I'm like,
energy
well, what
is still
that?
material.
Right? And so that's
Energy
the
is still
issue.
part of the material world. Spirits are not
Yeah.
part of
But let's put
unless
that
they're-
out there.
Unless they're manipulating.
Someone who wants to come talk to us, really, who's knowledgeable, and we can really have a good discussion
I know.
about the paranormal, and maybe does it yourself. Please get in contact with us at our and let's have a discussion. We can talk about things, and maybe we can prolong this. But for now, I think the dangers of the paranormal we've made pretty explicit. We'll continue to go back into supernatural things. We will get to science eventually. We've just had so much fun with all the crazy, creepy stuff. We're going to get into vampires again next, but not about the ones from TV shows, but of
We'll probably
real
mention
stories.
some TV shows. Yeah.
But with that, really take this warning to heart. Think about it. If pray about it. Look into it. Look at some of these books, Hungry Ghosts. Look at some of these exorcists who are speaking on YouTube.
Do not
And
search
really-
after the occult.
Right, and educate
Do not.
yourself, because God has a great plan for you, and that's true. And He wants you to fulfill and live that plan, both joy here and forever in heaven. So take that to heart, and we will talk to you soon. God bless.